He has taught Western civilization and U.S. history at Kenai Peninsula College, and he's done extensive research on the Shroud. So I'd like to invite Mr. Bird forward. And here he is. He's very Thank you for coming. He suggests we should pray, and that's a good idea. So let's pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving Father, we give you praise and thanks for all of your gifts, today especially for the gift of your Son, who gave his life so generously for each of us, and then rose again in the most magnificent of ways. We ask that you would send your Holy Spirit upon all of us, strengthen our faith in the resurrection and our unitedness to Christ's resurrected body. We also ask your blessing upon Mr. Bird as he gives this presentation today. We ask all of this in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Good evening, everyone. Well, to say thank yous right away, first of all, Marianne, who I got here at 4:30, and we needed all of that time to get everything just right with the background, the lighting, and some of the little stunts we're going to do here today. You're going to like them. I've been in close contact with her and Father John by phone and email, and also Sam Shepard. Where are you? Where are you, Sam? There you are. Okay, thank you, Sam, for your help. And then I have two college friends here. I'm here because I went to college in Bemidji. Mark Christo was really a tremendous star at Bemidji State University. Where are you, Mark? He's a member of this parish. There he is over there. He's with his daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter. All right. Mark and I were locker room hockey players back in the early 70s, and I'm a different person than I was then, okay? And my friend Fred Pierce is back there, and he and I were dorm buddies and off-campus roommates and a poker buddy as well, so, all right, I'm honored that Fred came with his wife, Carol. Thank you, everyone. So you know my background. I'm 70 years old. I had my bachelor's degree in Bemidji and my master's degree at Mankato. My daughter now is the music director at St. Paul Seminary. And my son Mario has just been appointed by the mayor of Anchorage, where I don't live. He's now the municipal attorney in Anchorage. And then my other son is also an attorney, and he spends a month every summer with his entire family at my house in Kenai, so he can be cooler than he is in Tampa. Okay. But his wife is now the vice president of media direction for Lila Rose's live action pro-life ministry. So, yeah, I love being a Catholic, and I'm up to my eyes in the cultural and political wars in my state, but this is a vacation for me. I give this talk 3 or 4 times a year, and it is often in front of a completely secular audience at the local Chamber of Commerce venue. I've done it to evangelicals many times, and of course, youth groups in our Catholic parish and in Anchorage many different times at Holy Rosary Academy. Even how many people here are not Catholic? Raise your hand, okay? I need to know that because most evangelicals, when they're talked to about the Shroud, they say, well, wait a minute now, we don't want to go overboard because we don't worship or pray to images. And I won't get into the explanations there. But Barry Schwartz, who's the world's overall expert on the Shroud and is Jewish, he usually puts them at rest when he says, well, this is not an image made by human hands. But my angle for my evangelical friends is this. I don't need this shroud to convince me of my faith, but it deepens it. And nobody can say that they don't need to have their faith deepened. And with that, I have often had a very receptive audience when I speak to Baptists and other non-denominational or other denominational evangelicals. I've done it to the Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and they're very receptive to that, and so forth. Okay, so here's what we're going to do here tonight. I wanted people to have a full half hour or something like that to look at the shroud. I first learned about the shroud in the late 50s. I was 6, 7, or 8 years old, I'm not quite sure. It was in the Chicago area, and I saw a slide presentation, and I was dumbfounded. And I've always held the interest in the shroud, and I was very much on top of it when the 1978 Shroud of Turin research project, which was put together by John Jackson, a physicist at the Air Force Academy, and all of his friends in NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and all over the world. So National Geographic covered that event very well, very unbiased, and I just kept studying and studying. I read a fantastic book which was completed about 1952 called A Doctor at Calvary. And it was done by a French forensic doctor. And just basing his analysis on the actual shroud itself, he's never been exceeded, only matched in making a forensic analysis of what you can see on the shroud. Lastly, I'm half Italian. I speak Italian very well. Io parlo italiano molto bene. Non c'è italiani qui stasera? No? Okay. But with a name like Bird, you gotta wonder. My dad was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. He was an intel and recon officer late in the war in Italy. My mother was an Italian partisan. She could speak 4 languages. She spied for a while, and when she made a hairbreadth escape, she then joined the rest of the partisans in the hills, and that's when my dad met her. And they didn't meet again until after the war, when he just bumped into her on a sidewalk cafe, and he knew her underground code name, which was irrelevant. The war was over. And she said, "How did you know my name?" He says, "Don't you remember? We met." "No." She walked away. But he nursed the beer for 8 hours at that sidewalk cafe. Okay. So, and she passed on the faith to me. All right? So that's where I'm coming from. All right. I went to Italy in 2010 to see the Shroud. My son has seen a replica of the Stanley Cup, and he put his infant daughter in it because the assistant coach of the Tampa Bay Lightning lives 2 doors down. But that's not the real Stanley Cup. The real Stanley Cup is kept in the Toronto Hall of Fame. All right? So I went to see the real Shroud in Turin in 2010. About 2 to 3 million people went through. And you could get to see the Shroud by working your way through the crowd and stand at a distance about where Sam is. You couldn't get any closer, and you had to be kind of, excuse me, pardon, move your way to the front. As close as they allow you was there. But you could also get a reservation online, and you got about this close to it for 5 minutes. So we did both. I stood in the back for an hour, and then the next day I got my 5 minutes in front of the Shroud. It looks somewhat different than this, and I'll be explaining that in the slide presentation shortly. I'm also going to have a sort of a live demonstration here in a moment or two. But one of the things I want you to notice, and this is what confuses people, and perhaps that happened to you, there is so much noise on this cloth that people don't know what they're looking at first. And the biggest distraction are these triangular patches. And of course, 2 parallel scorch lines here. There we go, scorch lines are here. These triangular patches. I also want you to note these holes here. These are called the L holes. 1, 2, 3, they got the letter L. You notice this is in verse here. 1, 2, 3, and a letter making the letter L here. There's also residual smoldering marks here. We'll get into that in a minute. What are these patches? Well, Sam, can you come on down? I'm going to explain these patches here very quickly. So this is just a 15-foot piece of cloth. We're going to pretend it's the shroud. Mark's going to grab it. Okay, Mark? Yeah, you can take that table here in a minute, okay? All right. Mark, we're going to fold it this way, lengthwise. Pull it tight. All right. Then we're going to go this way. Now we're going to it's called doubled in 4. Mark, can you move carefully away from there? Watch out for the easel. All right. Now we're going to fold it this way. This is a little bit longer than the actual shroud, by the way. I'm going to fold it again. One more time. Then I'm going to cross fold it this way, like that. The shroud folded up like this for hundreds of years. In 1532, its home was not in Turin, Italy. It was in Chambéry, France, which is kind of close to Monaco. Okay? The chapel caught fire, 1532. And a drop, it was kept inside of a silver box. A drop of molten silver caught the corner here. Under great and desperate circumstances, they had to fish this thing out of a sealed niche, yank it out. Fire is burning the chapel. The silver has a low melting point, but it was good enough to drop a triangular shaped drop of molten silver. Now, I took this rag here today and did the same thing that you just saw Mark and I do. I folded it lengthwise, and then I folded it and folded it again, and then I cross-folded it so that I'm going to pretend the drop of molten silver hit here. Got this? And this is what you get when they unfolded it. The poor Clare nuns looked at it, and this is what you got. 16 triangular shaped holes. And it's all done because that's how it was folded when the silver box melted. Got that? So the nuns did an expert job patching those holes, and they lasted for over 500 years. So that is the confusion that a lot of people have. Let's move the table out here right now. All right? And we're going to do another demonstration here. We have a seminarian here. And yes. He's not a priest yet, but tonight he's going to be in persona Christi. All right, Mark, get her down there. Here we go. All right. And let's go ahead and take your shoes off. Now, you probably are familiar with the fact that the dead are often buried with a chin bandage so that their mouth doesn't remain open in rigor mortis. Now, this is incredibly important because if you look at the shroud here, and if you haven't found your orientation yet, there's the face of Christ, here's the back of his head. Here, we'll be exploring all these parts, but there's nothing here. We do not have the top of his head. We've got the back of his head here. And that's likely because there was a chin bandage, probably tied with a knot at the top, but there could have been just the opposite. It could have been like a bonnet with a knot at the bottom. Don't know. All right? You've seen this every time you watch Scrooge and Marley. All right. So we'll have your head over there, okay? So Christ we're not going to lift him down, okay? It's a lot easier doing it with a live specimen. What's that? Yes, you're right. Sorry about that. Thank you. Now he's going to put his left hand on his head. Christ did not have a wristwatch. All right, now we're going to pull this over. And then we're going to tuck in the side, lift the sides up and over like this. Very neatly. And then, of course, I'm not going to completely wrap them. But I do want you to notice something. It's really important. Right up here, if you can see it even in the back, there's a long strip here. You can see the seam. Can you see that? John Jackson, he's the Air Force physicist, theorized that Joseph of Arimathea ripped this entire length. And I'm not ripping this thing, but he started to use it to cinch down his feet, okay, here, and then he would bring it up and wrap it around his shoulders, and then bring it up one continuous strip now, you got that? And wrap it probably around the neck. So Christ was bound inside of his burial shroud in all likelihood. And somehow later it was reattached. But we're not sure. Nobody knows why there's that strip. Nobody knows when it was sewn back on. But that's as good a theory as any. So I want you to take a good look, because what's going to happen here is that when we remove this, what you're going to have, if I smeared him with paint, got it, puts paint all over, you would then pull this back, all right, and have a reasonable understanding that the image on his back, if it was back was smeared with red paint, front was, left is right and right is left when you look at the image. So what appears to be here as the right hand of Christ over his left wrist is really his left hand over his right. And what appears to be, watch this, we're going to be analyzing all of this gigantic blood blotch here, okay, is not on the left side, but it's on the right side. And the spear of Longinus, you don't survive this, nobody does. It didn't just conveniently catch his heart on the left side. It went right through his lung, all the way through to the heart. Okay, like that. So now we'll look at a couple of analyses here. Let's move the table back now. Thank you. Bishop Sheen said these were guardian angels, you know, if you ever watch his lectures online. Here's a couple of things. I was shocked when I first saw it. I said, what on earth? This huge rectangular area here, and these little areas here, they're not the shroud. There's a backing cloth behind the shroud. It's been there for 500 years. Big section here. Ooh, and this little spot here is going to be extremely important. We'll get to it later. All of these places here indicated that somebody took some scissors to the shroud. Now, one of the things I tell people, if for some reason you could be certain that you owned the sandals of Christ, one of the real sandals, what would you do with it? I would preserve it. And that's what we do. But that's not what they did in the medieval times. They didn't need to be convinced of things that we want to be convinced of. You know what they did with relics? Yes, you do. They shared them. Now today, can you imagine if you wanted to cut up the sandals of Christ and say, let's send this one to this bishop in his cathedral, and you go, what are you doing? All right? Stop! There should be a museum, vacuum sealing, all the kinds of things that you would normally expect us to do, but that's not our culture. But they were smart enough, thank God, to do only the margins, you understand. They understood that. Okay, we don't know where the pieces went. Unfortunately, a lot of them were intentionally destroyed during the Protestant revolts. Now we're going to move to my slides here. And Marianne, if you want to kill the house lights, we'll keep these lights on the shroud. All right? So, if you haven't discovered the orientation here, this is the face of Jesus, and this is his backside. There are incredibly disturbing things to learn about this, which the slide show will bring out. But I think by now you understand that you're looking at a frontal and dorsal image. But there's more to this. You can understand blood. Blood, you got a bloody nose on your pillowcase. We know what blood looks like. All right? That we understand. This is what we don't understand, and they still don't understand it. They do not understand the body image. And we're going to probably reveal some things you may never have heard about before. Blood we can understand. Scorches we can understand. But the body image, we don't. And we will study as we make progress here through the slide presentation. So, here's our first look. Again, for my evangelical friends, if you want to understand Catholic devotion to relics, also, we do believe that they can be miraculous. We proved that when somebody simply touched the hem of Christ's garment, and they were cured of a hemorrhage. The garment didn't cure them of a hemorrhage. Christ did in their faith. But they felt. See, God knows we're tangible. We have to touch things. We have to smell things. We have to taste them. We have to see them. And so he allows us, like Moses did with that serpent, look at this snake. No! That's what I'm ordered to do. You'll be immune from snake bite if you look at this snake. So, I don't ask people to accept Catholic teaching, but to understand it, that's all. So, if you own, this is the most valuable baseball in the world. Absolutely. It's worth millions of dollars. It's got Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Ty Cobb's signatures on it. I'm sure it would auction for $10 million. It's just a baseball. Ink on it. No. And if you're a Beatles fan, those are John Lennon's glasses. Oh, we understand, okay? Something's rare. Somebody touched it. Babe Ruth touched this. And Lou Gehrig. And Ty Cobb. And John Lennon. Now I'm going to show you something that in my Shroud pilgrimages, this is in New Jersey. Now I'm visiting my daughter there, and I gave a Shroud talk there. And somebody said, do you know that this monastery, this Benedictine monastery, has a copy of the Shroud? I said, tell me more. Well, when they told me more, I said, I gotta go see it. This is 400 years old, and it was done for a noblewoman in Tuscany. And nobody the best Renaissance and Baroque artists in the world cannot possibly do what you see here. But they did their best. They even put in the triangular patches. But let me tell you what they did. This benefactress was giving lots of money for the building of cathedrals and so forth. And she wanted people to see what the Shroud looked like because most people didn't. All right? If the Shroud comes out every 25 or 50 years, most people, especially in the medieval times or even in the Renaissance times, they aren't going to make the trip. So they'd like to see what it looked like. So this was commissioned. by an artist. But then they laid it on the real shroud. They laid it on the real shroud. And when they pulled it back, at the spear wound, there was real blood. It's been tested. It's the same blood type as on the shroud. It was a miracle. How did this come to New Jersey? They rolled it up, put it in a bottle, threw it in the sea, and it floated in New York. No, it was gifted in the 1920s to the Catholics of New York and New Jersey because they had been supporting these Benedictine monasteries which owned it in Italy, and they said, you can have this. Type AB, that's the blood type on the shroud. And that's the blood type right there. Scientifically. Well, somebody could, prick somebody at AB and just paste. I'm sure that's what they did. Miraculous doesn't happen ever. Now, the burial cloths in the Bible, John Gospel, Simon Peter arrived just after him. He entered the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying there. I think he had long strips. I think this cloth was there. We'll explain that. And I think there was even a different cloth, which we'll get into details here. The cloth that had been around Jesus' head was rolled up, lying separate from the linen cloths. Now this is a linen cloth. I'm not sure if they're talking about this one. This is linen. There was another cloth, which we'll explore here tonight. But in any case, then the other disciple, meaning John himself, who had reached the tomb first, also went in. John went to the entrance of the tomb, and then he stopped. He let Peter go in. And then he finally went in himself, and he saw and believed. What on earth could possibly make you believe Christ rose from the dead out of a linen cloth? There you see. Can you get all the lights now, Marianne? Thank you. This is an artist's conception. That's John at the entrance, and there's Peter, and there's a really good expression on his face. He's freaked out. How many of you have seen the movie Risen? It's a really good movie. It's fictitious, but it's plausible. And did you notice when the Roman tribune looked at the burial cloth? Did you see? They had the shroud on, a face on it. If you didn't, watch it again, you'll see it. It just gives you a couple seconds glimpse of it. All right. So, but look at Galatians. Paul's scolding the Galatians. This is. I better run it back. He's scolding the Galatians. Galatia is today Turkey. Oh, you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Because they were leaving the faith somehow. Before your very eyes, Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. Well, they weren't there in Jerusalem to see it. No, it was portrayed. Did they see a passion play? No. They probably saw this cloth. What did it look like without all that stuff on it, right? This is probably what it looked like. Now there's a bit of a crease in here because it's taken from a fold-open coffee table book. So that's this. But there's no patches here. There's no scorch marks or anything. I can look at that all day. They, by computer, projected what it probably looked like, you see. And by the way, it was probably much more readily visible than it is today because the linen cloth is slowly yellowing, which is why the shroud is kept in a hermetically sealed atmosphere, I think with an inert gas called argon, so it won't yellow anymore. All right, so here's the full length, what you're seeing right here. I'll skip that. Now this is important because this is how the shroud looks like today. They removed the patches and vacuumed up the shroud. They sewed down the edges so that they wouldn't fray, the edges of the holes. And then put a new backing cloth on it. The most devout scientists who are constantly promoting the shroud said, "Why did you do that?" And nobody's got an explanation why they did it, but they didn't announce it. They didn't want any criticism. They did it in secret, and it was done. I've got my own theories. You're free to speculate, but that's how it looked like when I went to see it. Different than here with the patches. Most people are even unaware that the restoration occurred in 2002. And here is a depiction of what we just did here, so that people can understand how you got a front and back image. No chin cloth, that's okay. This is actually a Renaissance era painting. And there are watermarks here, which they've outlined, okay? And just so you can make sense of what you're looking at in front of you. Burn marks only. Oh, somebody said, I know how they made this shroud. They got a life-size brass statue made, heated it up, and then scorched it. This is because under ultraviolet light, scorch marks can be seen. But the facial image, when put under ultraviolet light, they experimented with this. The facial image and the fingers that are here cannot be seen under ultraviolet light, proving that the shroud isn't a scorch. The other scorches that you can see, the parallel line of burn marks and so forth, they show up under ultraviolet light, but not the facial image. So here's what launched a century of controversy and scientific interest. Secondo Pia was a physician, but he was also a very good amateur photographer. Now, to understand photography in 1898, we did not have film, we did not take snapshots. If you look at a Civil War picture, you might see, here's General Grant, but the horse behind him has a body and no head. That's because when the picture was taken, the horse was shaking its head and neighing or something like that. If you look at some of the portraits of Henry Clay or Andrew Jackson, their eyes might look glassy because you got to sit still for 45 seconds, you're going to blink, or your eye might move to the right or to the left, and your eye's going to look weird, okay? So Secondo Pia has to deal not with a snapshot, but a lens that he just pulls the cover and looks at his watch, and judging from the amount of light he has and the amount of sensitivity on his glass plate, he knows how much to expose. He's the first man ever to photograph the shroud. He did full length, front and back, and then up close of the face. So there he is. He lived a long life. And here's the frontal side. Again, I'm putting it vertically here, okay? All right? Because we're going to look at a different way of looking at the shroud here, thanks to Secondo Pia. There's the frontal side. And some of the things you're going to notice here. There are bloodstains on the forearm. And you'll notice here that the wound is in the wrist. But everyone knows he was crucified in the hand. In fact, the Gospels say the nails entered his hand. Well, they did. But it emerged from the wrist. There's a spot here, and if you look at your own palm, I don't know what fortune tellers call these various creases. Most of us have three main creases. One that reaches right down to the heel of your hand. And a French forensic doctor by the name of Destow, experimenting with cadavers, took a body and put nails in the middle of the palm, and they couldn't support the body. Okay, the wrist is better, but the wrist isn't the hand. You're right. No, the spot of disto is right at the heel of your hand, the base of your hand. The base of your hand. Very base of the palm of your hand. And it had to be driven in at an angle, of course. So it emerged at the wrist, you understand. Very few crucifixes get this correct. I've seen crucifixes that, hey, the Shroud says he was crucified in the wrist. They put the nails right in the wrist. I give them credit for trying, to make a correction. But I've seen two where they got it right, where the nail is driven at the base of the palm and it merges out the back in the wrist. We'll see that shortly. There's much that you can tell without going into the enhanced photographic negative. For instance, he's got a distended chest, which indicates asphyxiation. And many people wonder, I know I crucified, man, a shock and loss of blood. It's asphyxiation. Which is why a victim is often crucified with bent legs so that they can use the strength of their legs as they hang from a cross. They can't exhale properly. If you're ever at a pull-up bar, you grab the pull-up bar and just allow yourself to hang there. You're going to find out you can't breathe very well. If you hang there too long, okay? Your feet have got to be off the ground. So what a person actually has to do to breathe is to use primarily their leg and, of course, their nails in the base of their hands and pull themselves up and catch their breath until they finally go back down again. We can tell he has a distended chest. We can also tell the angle of the blood flow, that when he was taken down, his arms were like this. And if he's right-handed like most people, his last strength would have been in his right hand to pull himself up. We can tell this by the blood flow on the forearms and also from his wrist. That's post-mortem bleeding is what it's called. But something's very disturbing here, and that's the backside. On the backside, we can tell, first of all, that two men of unequal height delivered 120 strokes. And you're not going to like to see what the whips look like. Now, Mel Gibson went over the top with the scourging scene, and he knew it. He says, the only way I can get Americans' attention. He went over the top. It was bad enough what Christ had to endure. But we do know, as we look at the dorsal side, that there's different angles. The two men were of unequal height, and somebody was stronger than the other in all likelihood, because somebody's delivering a forehand and the other one's delivering a backhand. They match. All right, we can also see here exudation of post-mortem bleeding at the small of the back, which is exactly where you would expect it to be as it pooled after Christ was buried. But there's something else here that's going to get your attention when we look at something different. So stand by. Many of you young people here tonight have never seen a photographic negative. No, it's true. I'm so glad we don't have to mess with negatives. All right? Now we use digital. Sam, are negatives outside of your experience?
No.
Dim memory? Okay. Well, here's a rather attractive lady, and this is the negative, and this is the way it had to be done. Okay? By the way, it should be that left is right and right is left, and they haven't done that here. But that's a photographic negative. So Secunda Pia took this picture up close of the face of Christ. That's what he saw. Then he's got a limited amount of time to get back to his dark room, and where the image and the photosensitive chemicals retain the image on a glass plate. So he goes clippity-clop at 3 o'clock in the morning from the cathedral down to his lab, And he's got a gas lamp with a red filter on it, and he's soaking this glass plate up and down in the bath, and he knows it's time to take a look at the photographic negative. And what he saw, he almost fainted. In fact, he said, I was the luckiest man in the world. I'm the first person to see what Jesus Christ really looked like in 1,850 years. Here's what he saw. And boy, did it get the attention of the world. And Secunda Pia knew immediately, two negatives make. So what you see on the shroud, this is a photographic negative. Not the blood stains, that's positive, and they show up as the normal way. But the face and the arms, all right? This is his face. Don Lynn of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory said, you look at that face, and there's a nobility to it. And considering what happened to the body, the two just don't go together. Now, forget the face. Look at the negative of the entire body. That's incredible. That's what it is. Here we can see now the way things really are. Left is left, his left is the real. This is his left arm, because it's reversed in the negative, you understand. All right, he was speared on the right side. You can see that the scourge marks actually came around, as you would expect them to do, as the tongs came around and got him in the front of his thighs, as well as the back of his thighs, okay? You can see that the knee, this left knee is more bruised than the right knee. It probably took the blow the hardest when he fell. And then you can see the puncture wounds here, and this is what's called the number 3 blood stain. You'll get it's very curious blood stain. Do you know how the Arabs, we use Arabic numerals. Have you ever seen? They're very smooth, like all their writings are, curves and figure 8s and stuff like that. You see the way the Arabs make the number 3. The number 3 is laying on its back with a tail. 1, 2, and 3. My. Does God even control his blood flow? 3 persons in one God? That's just my theory. The Romans didn't use Arabic numerals, but they didn't know photographic negatives like we did. God is the master of time. You can look at this, and it was Pope. One of the popes said, you can look at this sitting down, and you're going to wind up on your knees. Now let's look at the dorsal side. This is very disturbing, because you can see here, oh look, Jesus has a ponytail. Didn't know that, did you? It was tied back in any case. That's how we know what Jesus looked like. The art history I'm not going to get into today, but Sam said, man, yeah, I could have a 2-hour talk on just art history. It's the shroud that gave us the template of what Jesus looked like. We'll get into that in a minute, but here's his ponytail. Look at his bruised shoulders. Unlike what art shows you, Jesus is carrying a full cross. He did not carry a full cross. He carried a railroad tie on his shoulders, and his arms were tied to the railroad tie. And every time he fell, he either hit his knee or he took it as a face plant. We know he's got a broken nose. Go back here. This nose is broken. And you'll see Jesus has a forked beard. Next time you look at any portrait of Jesus, you will see he's got a forked beard. You will see that there's no beard hair underneath his lower lip. You will see he has an elongated nose. He has owl-like eyebrows. And his hair is always parted in the middle. Let's go back to the dorsal side, though, because there's much that it tells us. You ever see a crucifix? An artist has his option. He can have Jesus nailed, one nail for each foot, but most have the left foot over the right with one nail. This ends that speculation. Do you see? The left knee is bent. You see there? Do you see there's more blood under the right foot sole than the left? So he was, in all likelihood, crucified with one nail with the left foot over the right. You can look at these scourge marks from the ankles, the calves, the thighs, the buttocks, the pool of blood at the small of the back, the crisscrossing here, and then the bruises on the shoulders. And they spend hours just looking at one side or the other. The scientists do. See, here is the up close and personal look on the dorsal head area, the puncture wounds. Again, the back of the head only. We don't have a look at the top of the head because he probably had a chin bandage. And there's the photographic negative. When Notre Dame Cathedral burned 3 years ago, 4 years ago, my first concern was the crown of thorns. And within an hour or two, the report came that they saved the crown of thorns. How the Notre Dame Cathedral gets that claim, we'll investigate it. But this is far more disturbing. This shows you the Roman Flagrum. There are several varieties. One of them is to put lead BBs and to thread the leather thongs through holes and tie a knot at the end, or they might have a dumbbell style. So try and imagine 120 lashes. And the BBs themselves were sometimes intentionally scruffed up or burred so that they weren't smooth. Some of the great saints have said that the scourging was done for sins of impurity, sexual sins. The scourging itself is remarkable that it didn't kill him, notwithstanding what Mel Gibson portrayed. Well, now let's go to science's analysis. The negatives, by the way, let me tell you something. Were so convincing, by the way, that Yves Delage, an agnostic, top-notch French scientist, looked at these negatives within a year or two after the 1898 photographs and was absolutely convinced that this was anatomically perfect and that it is the historical Jesus. He didn't make any pronouncement about him rising from the dead or anything. That was not 1902. And skepticism was already wondering, well, you know, the apostles probably made up the Gospels and to fulfill the prophecies of the Old Testament and so forth. It's really, you got to contort yourself into a pretzel or a Z to do this, but that's what modern biblical scholarship has done. But Yves Delage, they dropped the piano on him. How could you be so stupid to stick your neck out and say that's the historical Jesus? Could be anybody who was crucified. He said, no, there's too many coincidences with the Gospels. Too many. Who else gets a crown of thorns? But the Romans normally would not scourge a person before crucifixion. That's double punishment. Christ was expected to be scourged and released, if you know the Gospels. So there's just so many coincidences that Delage stuck his neck out. He paid for it. All right. So John Jackson was a professor of physics along with his colleague Eric Jumper at the Air Force Academy. And he had friends connected with the space program. And he said, you know, we could do a lot of analysis with what we've learned in our lunar landings and our soft landing on Mars and so forth. Why don't we apply some of this to the Shroud? And he rounded up. And a lot of them, absolutely no faith, but yeah, I like the challenge. Let's see what we find out. And so the hoops he had to go through to get permission from the King of Italy, who was exiled in Portugal, to get permission from the curator of the Shroud in Turin, and to bring in all of these scientists and to get money for it, he pulled it off. He pulled it off, and in 1978, they had 5 round-the-clock days to analyze the Shroud. One of the things that really got John Jackson interested was that he took a picture of the Shroud and found out it had a 3D character to it. He did that with something called a VP8 analyzer. No other photograph gives you a 3-dimensional. Photograph is 2-dimensional. But the Shroud has 3D properties to it that no other photograph can cover. This is microscopic photography. They're getting into, you'll see some of the pictures here. Let me, here they are with the Shroud, and everyone who's seen it and touched it, it says, the blood looks too red for something that's 2,000 years old, and the cloth is too supple. You expect it to be crusty and stale. Well, then they found out bilirubin is super red blood, and it only happens to people who have been tortured. And then they found out that the Shroud, the linen itself, demonstrates it's been carefully preserved whenever there was an opportunity to do it. And then the other thing was there was a Swiss criminologist by the name of Max Frey. He took 3M Scotch tape and started putting it on the Shroud and putting the microscopic pollens under a microscope. Now, if you were accused of murder, let's say at the Curtis Hotel down in Minneapolis. Curtis still in operation? No. See how long I've been away? 45 years, okay? But the lobby had a palm tree, and you said, I haven't been anywhere near that hotel where the murder took place. Well, they take your shirt, and they found out that there's palm tree pollens on your shirt. Aha, you've been in that hotel lobby, you liar. That's how Max Frey would gain some convictions. So he pulls off all these pollens, puts them under a microscope, and starts identifying that, oh, here's one from Greece, another one from Asia Minor, Turkey, here's one from Jerusalem, here's one from Italy, and France, where we knew the Shroud has been. So that was another thing in its favor. All right, just some pictures here. They're non-destructive tests. They put it up on a metal sheet with super magnets, so they didn't even put push pins in it. Okay, that's how careful they were trying to be. And everybody had their scheduled time. I got 3:30 in the morning. Yeah, get on it. Okay. All right, whatever the tests were, they were doing them all. It's going to take many years, of course, to analyze it all. Here's an actual soaked-through blood stain. Now, this is the body image, which you can't see here. You're going to get a better look at it in the next picture. The body image is incredibly subtle. Here you go. In other words, that's from the nose tip here, okay? Now you can see you've got his hair, you've got his mustache, you've got his arms. It's not blood. The first theory was it's got to be a vapor graph. A decomposing body putting out urea and ammonia, coupled with burial ointments and spices, would project this image on a cloth. That was the 1902 theory. Nobody's ever made a vapor graph in the history of the world. It doesn't work. All you have to do is look at the heat coming off a candle. It's not a direct shot, is it? It's quavering. You know what I'm saying? It was a nice try. You want to see how superficial that is? It's only yellowing the fibrils. These are threads. This is like thread from your spool. All right? So look at the fibrils. They're just barely, it's like just barely discolored. Up close it means nothing. That's why you have to get back. And the whole thing's perfectly anatomically cohesive. So shallow, it doesn't come through on the other side like blood flow does. You understand? All right? So now what? How do you explain that? It's a scorch. We've already proven it's not a scorch. They don't know what caused it. They don't know. Then we have, okay, let's get it carbonized. Carbon-14. Now, I'm following this very well in the 1980s, and I was really looking forward to the carbon-14 results. And when they came up with this, I had one reaction, and it was this. This doesn't make sense. You can't have all these hundreds of pieces of evidence pointing to the authenticity and think that the carbon-14 dating is going to wrap it up as a fake. And notice they've got a 130-year window. That's not good. Now, there's much to say about the carbon-14 dating. There is a nefarious, sinister element to it. I won't go into it. But I'm going to tell you now that hardly a single knowledgeable scientist or a skeptic wants to talk about it. It's the biggest mistake in the history of science since Piltdown Man. And it's an enormous embarrassment, and it's almost absolutely certain that it was wrong. And I'm going to prove it to you as a history teacher, not as a physicist. There's other disciplines besides, biochemistry and stuff. But these guys, British Museum, Zurich, and I guess this is a British guy too, but they took their sample here, right here. I want you to look at this later. You'll notice this picture is taken in 1978. This little section here, which was removed, has got a little whitish area. In 1972, a small sample was taken by somebody by the name of Reyes, R-A-E-S, under circumstances that he got permission and had nothing to do with science. Might have been for a relic. I don't know. But they took their samples from that same spot when their own rules said we will take 3 samples from 3 different locations. But they didn't. They took it right here by the Reyes sample, which is here. And if you were to look at the shroud now, and you knew exactly where to look, there'd be about this much more taken off. You'll see it up close here in a minute. So they violated that. Then they were not supposed to pick up the phone and say, how's it doing over there in Zurich? You got anything to say? Yeah. And they started colluding with each other. It's like jurors being able to talk to each other before all the evidence is in, you see. They violated other protocols. So they came up with this, and the exclamation mark, ha 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 ha, Your shroud's a fake. It can't possibly be duplicated. So something's wrong here, something's bad wrong. And a lot of theories were promoted that didn't really make the click until something happened. Here's the Reyes sample here. For those of you who are real close, you can see it's kind of a triangular shape here. See that here? Reyes sample. This much went to Arizona. This went to Zurich. This went to Oxford. Here's another sample, went to Arizona. This was retained, which meant that it was going to be kept for reasons that we're really glad they kept it. All right. Now what? Meet Joe Marino and Sue Benford. They're much older now. Sue died from cancer. They're sitting looking at the shroud on their television at home. You can go to a website and really isolate any part of the shroud you want to. And they looked at this part and they said, well, look at this. What? Well, look, that's a different kind of weave, that area of the shroud. Here, there's a different type of weave. They wrote papers on it. Barry Schwartz looked at it. They exchanged phone calls. And then Barry calls up Ray Rogers. Ray Rogers was one of the great scientists of 1978. And here you can possibly see it now. This is from the sample that Ray Rogers kept. There's a different type of yarn here and a different type of weave. And he said, Barry, these people, whoever Benford and Marino are, come on, you're going to tell me in a suburban Ohio home, someone's going to find out we made a big fat mistake by looking at the TV? I'll call you back in 10 minutes. He called back 90 minutes later and said, oh, we missed something. What they missed was that there's cotton in this section. Cotton that was used to repair that section of the shroud probably in the late Middle Ages or early Renaissance, and was even given a mordant dye so that it wouldn't look out of place. Here's Ray Rogers when they're looking underneath the shroud back in 1978 with a fiber optic camera, and they want to see what's on the back side. This is Professor Ricci. Here's John Jackson. Okay, and Rogers was honest, but always asking the hard questions. And if he thought you were too gullible, he'd pull out a 6-gun and shoot you. That's the way Barry Schwartz put it. And then he ate it. He said, this is different. And there is something called a French reweaving technique that is well known for those of you who are experts in textiles. A few of you are, I know. But he said, my goodness, this puts the whole carbon. You see, the carbon-14 dating wasn't wrong. It was confused because it had late medieval or early Renaissance cotton threads in it. So when they burned this postage size stamp and make their carbon-14 dating, it was all wrong, which is why they should have taken it from 3 different spots, which they didn't. Here's the press conference. That's Barry Schwartz. I've had him on my radio show 5 or 6 times, 60 to 90 minutes at a time. So yeah, I didn't explain. I have, in my retirement as a teacher, I have a radio show, 5 days a week, 6 to 8 your time, and you can listen to it online. Okay? And I cover just any topic under the sun. So, but there's more to show you. Remember the dates were 1390 to 1260? This is the Hungarian Prey manuscript. Now, I gave you the timeline of the shroud to show you certain things I can't bother to fill you in. But Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire, had the shroud from about 944 to 1204. All right? 300 years. 250 years. They called it the Holy Mandilion, which means holy towel, because they folded it up and only showed the facial part. And they allowed their great iconographers, the Byzantine iconographers, to use that as a template. The great pictures of Christ that are on mosaics and icons comes from this. All right, now what do we know about this? This was a lettered home. It's the first letter we know written in the Hungarian language, like Dante was the first person to write in Italian. This is an historic document, and it's written in Hungarian there, 1193. We got the precise date. And this guy is saying, I went to Constantinople and I saw the burial shroud of Christ. Oh, look at how the hands are crossed at the groin. Oh, and there's no thumbs. There's no thumbs, and there's no thumbs there either, because when you're crucified, it pulls down an ulnar nerve and it pulls the thumb into the palm of your hand. More proof. Here, the L holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, and he's got 2 of them. Now I'm going to tell you about the L holes. The L holes had nothing to do with the 1532 fire that made 16 triangular holes. We don't know when they were there, but we know they've been there for centuries. Here's the L holes. Here's one, and it was folded lengthwise, so here's its opposite, and then it was doubled over, so you have a very, very faint L here. The coals did not penetrate completely. Here they are here. Probably a pious incenser, incensing the shroud, had some loose coals fly off. Oh! They had to blow them away. They fell in that pattern. We know this goes way back. The Byzantines had that cloth from 944 to 1204. But before that, it was in Edessa. Today it's called Urfa, Turkey. Edessa had this cloth which they discovered. They discovered it in the walls of the city when a flood damaged the walls. And oh, this is the famous shroud we've heard so much about. It's been hiding there in darkness and in dryness for hundreds of years. And instantly, the pictures of Christ changed from looking like an Apollo, a Roman god, to what we now recognize as Christ. But it's even more interesting that the Byzantines wanted this cloth, and the Muslims took over Edessa. And the Byzantines were very, very strong in the 900s, and they sent an army to conquer Edessa. They were not at all interested in conquering the city. They wanted only one thing. They wanted the shroud, and they put it under siege for 1 calendar year. Finally, the Muslims couldn't get any help. The Christians did not want to give up their shroud. Thank God they did. And they negotiated. The Byzantines said, we will never again attack Edessa. Just give us the shroud. And they brought it back to Constantinople in 944, and it stayed there from 944 to 1204, which meant that the Hungarian Pray manuscript, which shows the L holes here, and this is exactly the same shroud that we have, was taken by the Byzantines in 944. So now the 1390 to 1260 dating of the carbon-14 test doesn't go back to just 1193. It goes back to 525 when the Edessans found it inside their city walls, and 944 when the Byzantine army captured it to put it under safekeeping in Constantinople. And who took it in 1204? We don't know. The best guess is the Knights Templar. They were all excommunicated for sacking Constantinople when they should have been attacking the Muslims. And they had it for 150 years when it showed up in central France. From that point on, nobody disputes the history of the Shroud. That's why I gave you that timeline. You can study it at home, I hope. Okay? So the carbon-14 dating is disproved simply by history. We don't need anything else. Beyond that, we've got it. We've got it. The L-holes are there. Here are the L-holes here in a copy that was made in 1516 before the triangular holes were made, okay? Because the other fire was 1534, so this is a really bad copy, but it's the best. It just gives you a sense of what it looks like. See the L-holes there? 4 of them. They were well aware of the historical accuracy of history, not so confident in carbon-14 techniques. Now we get into the realm of the latest three-dimensional projections that a computer can do for us. And in this you see Christ in 3D. It gets even more interesting because when you look at here's the Pope looking at him in the Shroud, that's Pope John Paul. Here's the crucifix. This one was made with the Shroud's latest interpolations manifested. You can't see his right arm here because it's at a 90-degree angle, okay? And his head is down, all right? This ought to get your attention. The scourgings. You've been wondering about this other cloth, I know. I'm getting to that. This crucifix is actually in Alaska, and it was done by a local artist in Palmer, Alaska, about 200 miles from my home. And this guy has it right. The nails go in at the spot of Desto, at the base of the hand, base of the palm, and come out on the backside through the wrist. He's got the scourge marks, you can't see it here, on the front and the back. So that if you look behind the corpus on the crucifix, you will see that. And he's even got the condemnation, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, correct. It's written right to left, even in Greek, because we have a fragment of the actual condemnation message. What I have written, said Pilate. This is also what computers are telling us. If you want to project this into almost a statuesque manifestation with the scourgings, the distended chest, the back, but something else. And if you look at the photographic negative, you know exactly what would happen if you could lay yourself down naked on a pane of glass. And if somebody could look underneath, you would see that your buttocks and probably your thighs and calves would be flattened out, right? But on the Shroud, they're not. That's because science, this is not the Pope telling you this, this is not a theologian telling you this. Science has said the only thing that could possibly allow that to happen was that the projection of the body image occurred when it was hovering. And it gets even more interesting because if you really whipped somebody to death and crucified them and you covered them up with a cloth and you picked up all the bloodstains, what do you think would happen if you removed the cloth? What would happen to all those bloodstains? They'd smear. They wouldn't make any coherent sense, you understand. But these do. And the apostles, for fear of the Jews, had the doors locked. And suddenly Jesus appeared in the room with them and said, "Peace be with you." If he can pass through a locked door, what's a linen cloth? That's probably what it was like. And the one thing I didn't show you is that when kings were buried, the richest kings, especially in ancient Egypt, had a handkerchief laid over their face, on their mummies, on their shroud, lovingly, tenderly. It's made out of the world's most expensive and rarest cloth called bezes. But before we go there, this is the Sudarium of Oviedo. Can we get full lights down, please, Marianne? Oviedo's in Spain, and the Sudarium means basically the cloth of Oviedo. When Jesus was on the cross and had to be taken down, his face was covered so that he would not lose the dignity of having his eyes open and being seen, you understand. But Jewish burial customs are very meticulous. You must soak up as much of the blood as you can and bury it with the rest of the body. And so something like this was wrapped around his head. His eyes were bleeding. His arm was bent like this, so they couldn't quite get it around his head, so they doubled it back. But once the arm was released, they pulled it all the way around him like a turban, like you're seeing there. And it was buried with him. Here is the Oviedo cloth. It is a companion piece. You have type AB negative blood. They proved that in 1978. This is type AB negative. Guess what blood type is on that New Jersey relic? AB negative. All right? The next thing to understand is you look at this slide now, and here is the Oviedo cloth. There are congruences for you to analyze. These are the eye sockets here. These are the eye sockets. And they can even see here there are puncture wounds placed here and here, here, I think here. Remember, it's folded more than one different way, all right? And so there is no body image on the Sudarium cloth. There's no body image, all right? Just blood, a lot of blood. And so that's what you're looking at there. Now, Marianne, I'm gonna ask you maybe to dim the lights to 50%, okay? They have never brought the Sudarium and the Shroud of Turin together, but you can pretty well take the proper measurements and do it here. And so here's what I want you to take a look at. You can see the face here of Christ. Here are the blood stains at the eye socket. Why the eye sockets? Because the blood went through the nasal cavity and out the tear ducts. All right? Now what about this other cloth? This is Manapello, Italy. It's an obscure village in the Apennine Mountains directly east of Rome. I've never been there. But I've talked to a group like this in New Jersey once, and a lady raised her hand. I've seen the Manapello cloth. To understand our sixth station of the cross, here's the cathedral, and it's a church in Manapello. Here's Veronica. The sixth station. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. We adore thee, O Christ, and we praise thee, because by thy holy cross thou hast redeemed the world. Let's consider now the loving tenderness of Veronica as she soaked up the blood and sweat of Jesus and did his image project onto that cloth miraculously. I don't think that's where it happened. I think this is a really good medieval legend to explain something that did exist. All right? That's what I'm thinking. So what was it? Well, here is a titanic statue in St. Peter's. And underneath the vault of St. Peter's, they used to have the Veronica veil. And here is an angel holding it up. And if you look carefully, it's going to be hard to see it, but they actually etched the face of Jesus onto that cloth. The Vatican did have the cloth, but it was stolen during the sack of Rome in 1532, I think. And thank God, somebody spirited it away, because the Vatican was entered and sacked completely. What they have now, and this was brought out every Good Friday, what they have now is a painted copy, and it's old, it's black, you can hardly see anything on it, it's painted, faded out. That's what they hold out. It's not the real Veronica. Here it is, and that's Pope Benedict. He understood that the authenticity is so hot, so worthy of investigating, he went to visit it, okay? It's kept open 365 days out of the year. Here's Pope Benedict visiting a very mysterious cloth, which I think was laid over the face on top of the shroud. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a good look at it. But here is, I guess we're going to have to ask for the house lights one more time to be put down. Sorry, Marianne. I really want you to see this. This painting here on the right is supposed to be Veronica. The problem is she's dressed in late medieval garb. Okay? 1404, this painting was made. Look at that. See? It's transparent. And you will see the face of Christ on both sides. All right? Here is the real Manipella cloth. It's like etched glass. You will see the face of Christ from both sides. Nobody knows how to do that on a piece of cloth. And what kind of a cloth is it? Byssus is the world's rarest and most expensive cloth. Here's a look at the eye. And you have to, it's almost like a hologram. And it glows. It kind of like has an iridescence to it. I've never seen it. This lady's saying no photograph really can do justice. But now take a look at the next. You can't paint on Byssus cloth. It holds dye. You can't paint on it. How does that eye get there? How do you see it on both sides? Go ahead, somebody else get some piece of cloth and show me how it's done. Leonardo did it. You heard that one about the Shroud, haven't you? Except he hadn't been born until 150 years later. How do you get Byssus cloth? It comes from strands of some sort of mollusk that's found off the coast of Egypt. And you harvest these strands, and you get a sort of steel wool. There. And it shimmers. It looks like gold steel wool. All right? And there's only one person in the world that knows how to work Byssus. She lives in Sardinia. And there's a bishop's glove, really old, made out of Byssus. It holds dye. How did they get IHS there? They put like a form on it, and where the dye wouldn't touch it, see? Okay. Here's the lady who works with Byssus. She looked at the Manipella cloth. She says, yes, it's Byssus. No, you can't paint it. And it matches the shroud perfectly. Here's how it looks. And I'm a bit troubled sometimes when you look up close and personal. You wonder, especially when you look at the lips and the teeth. But remember, the medium is not made like a photographic negative. All right? The medium doesn't hold image perfectly. So the weave and so forth. However, the one thing I want to point out is when you look at the face of Christ on the shroud, He doesn't look like a dead man. He looks like a live man who's about to open his eyes. And if he's passing through that linen shroud, his eyes are open as they pass through the basis cloth. God, being the author of time, left us his photograph, knowing that in an age that worships science, he's going to give us a gift. Researchers have taken the sudarium and the photograph of the shroud and the manopella cloth, and they all match up perfectly. They've never brought all three together. You don't need to. You just get life-size replicas. So, 10-point analysis. Does the shroud stand up to Scripture? Sure does. Does it stand up to the physical and chemical analysis? In other words, the VP8 three-dimensional thing? Nobody knew that. Nobody knew that in the Middle Ages if it was a forger. All right? It holds up to forensic analysis. It's anatomically perfect. I gave this talk in Florida, and a man said, I've been in nuclear medicine for 50 years, and until I saw this replica, I doubted the shroud's authenticity. But he said it's too anatomically perfect, down to the tiniest little nuance. Art history shows us. Historical evidence shows us it's authentic. The textile analysis shows us it's authentic. The pollen and debris show us. Cross-references from other artifacts. And there's even off-body images. Avinoam Danin was the top botanist in Israel. He's died, but he gave a documentary, and he says, I can see chrysanthemums on here, and I can see another flower that's only found in Jerusalem. Now, you can't see it unless you somehow get the tiniest images computer enhanced. He said, I can even tell you that it was, this is the pistil, which is a part of one of the blossoms, okay, that is only seen in the springtime. I believe the crucifixion occurred on Friday, April 7th, 30 AD. You'll get an argument from a lot of good scholars, but that's the one I choose. And the resurrection was Sunday, April 9th, 30 AD, springtime. Now, there are other relics, this talk I'm not going there, except for real quickly. But the carbon-14 test of 1988 is now almost totally debunked. It's the only thing that didn't make sense, that showed maybe the shroud is not authentic. If you go online, you will see the skeptics' essays and so forth. Some of them are quite scholarly and worthy of being read, but they haven't caught up to speed yet with the Marino-Benford affair. Okay? Why not a new carbon-14 test? Well, first of all, in the restoration of the shroud, how much more do you want to keep cutting it? Well, the medieval times did, but I think the Vatican removed those patches, vacuumed it up to tell science you had your crack at it, and you blew it. There's a new X-ray technique, though, that might really put the hammer down on it. It won't damage the shroud. It's called scatter X-ray. I'm not quite sure what the term is, and it's hot. It just came out in the last couple of months. And if you read the National Catholic Register, they talk about it. I'm going to go real quickly, because my longer version takes you to other relics. Okay? Yes, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. We've got the Holy Grail. Forget Monty Python. By the way, the word Graal is French, and it means chalice, okay? And we've anglicized it to mean grail, all right? Sir Galahad, the Tales of Sir Arthur, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and Indiana Jones. Forget it. We got it. There it is in Valencia, Spain. And if you don't believe me, the popes do. All right, there it is. Get a good close look at it. Because this is what Jesus probably set the Last Supper with. Just the cup. It has since been embellished with rubies, emeralds, and pearls, of course, and made into a chalice. This is Syrian alabaster, and it dates to 50 BC. And how do you make alabaster? It's a very soft type of marble, and you would have a spindle that would slowly take a piece of alabaster and polish it and open up a concave cup with it. It'd be very expensive back then, too. That's it. Here is Pope John Paul. He knows believe me, the Vatican Museum and archaeologists, they're the best in the world. And the Pope wouldn't be going here if he hadn't been convinced. And here is Pope Benedict. But we got the Holy Grail. There's oodles of relics of Christ out there. Might have the spear that pierced his side. And what about, we do have this. This is the condemnation. And it's worm-eaten. We've only got half of it, probably because medieval people cut it up and loaned it out. Okay, and everything's written backwards, not only in Hebrew, but in Greek and Latin. No forger's going to do that. It was probably a Hebrew scribe who was used to writing right to left and knew Latin and Greek and wrote it backwards. There you go. That's how it would look if we still had it intact. You see the sign INRI, INRI, okay? Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The Romans didn't leave spaces. They put little dots between their words, okay? Here it is in Hebrew up there, and then it's in Greek as well. Again, we only have part of it. And I didn't bring it because I couldn't carry it on an airplane. But I do have a woven replica of what the crown of thorns actually probably looked like. It's not the wreath. It was much worse. It was probably a helmet-like cap that was woven. And because there's pollens of thistles in huge amounts right here, around the head, right? Thistles. What did Romans do when a guy won a race? They gave him a big victory wreath, right? So to mock him, aside from the crown of thorns, you're not going to have thistles last 2,000 years. They probably cut thistles to give it a green-like appearance in utter mockery. And those are the pollens that we have at that spot in the shroud. Again, I could be here another 2 hours. Here's the actual wreath. See, this was the base, and from the circlet, they built up the cap or helmet of thorns. And here it is as before the fire in Notre Dame. They take it out the first Friday of every month. If you're in Paris, of course, I don't know if they're going to show it until the new restoration of the cathedral is finished. I have no idea. But we do have part of the crown of thorns in all likelihood. It was given to King St. Louis in the 1200s, one of the great kings of all time. The relics of Christ. We can talk about the relics of some of our great saints, but we have relics of Christ. They're there for us. You've only been given a little taste, a little sample. You can go many places on the internet and learn more about all of these things. Or pick up some great books. Tan Publishing has got great stuff on Eucharistic miracles. Right behind this screen is God in that tabernacle. True story, King Louis was once told that there was a bleeding host. He says, they said, aren't you going to come see it? He says, I don't need to. I don't need to. So if we get the lights now, Marianne, and I'll take any questions that anybody might have. Yes, sir. I'll repeat your question for those who can't hear it. Yes, the estimates for Jesus is 5'11" and 175 pounds. What's that? His question was height and weight of Jesus. 5'11", 175 pounds. Yes, sir. Here, those are the patches that covered the burn holes. Okay? This is before the restoration of 2002, which removed the patches. All right? Yes, sir. Louder, please. How come the shroud hasn't rotted away? Okay. Well, we know that linen lasts thousands of years because of the Egyptian mummies. That's just one piece of evidence right there. Good question. Like I said, they were shocked at how supple it looked when they got their hands on it. I see that people are leaving here, so I'll be here for questions. I want to thank you all. This is the biggest crowd I've ever had.
Up and look at the shroud some more, you can. You can ask Bob questions, and there's cookies and a little refreshment on your way out.